What's up? It's Marco, Sage of Soccer, and the U.S. men's national team just lost 2-0 to Costa Rica, and man, it was a pretty bad performance. I already celebrated us qualifying for the World Cup last time, so even though I do have the shirt on from our last World Cup, it's not going to be that today. I've been saying this for a little bit now, but we are now qualified for the World Cup, which means at this point, it's not about qualification, it's not about just getting results, it's about how we play and making sure we're prepped for the World Cup. Because at this moment, our standard has to rise, and we have to be ready to play against some of the best teams in the world. And right now, we do not look ready for the World Cup, not in the slightest bit. The squad has numerous issues, including not being able to play it out of the back, which really limits our ability to impose our will on opponents. And this is why people want John Brooks in the squad. I'm under no illusions that he doesn't have issues as a player, but when we have him in the squad, we can actually play as a real team, instead of like what we do now, where we basically are just incapable of building the ball at the back because we don't have 11 players on the field who are good enough with the ball at their feet. Also, in the final third, we're not looking good. Goal scoring has been a problem throughout this entire World Cup qualifying campaign. No strikers have really stepped up, and yes, Keylor Navas has made some saves, but Navas is not going to be a top 5 goalkeeper we play in the World Cup. Arguably, he might not be a top 10 one. So, he's not an excuse. And at this point, we can't score goals. And that's a huge issue. And the lack of creativity in the squad is really apparent. Despite how many really solid players we have in this team, we're not able to make chances. It might be the system, maybe just the level of players. I'll be talking about the players more later, but it's a concern. And also, set pieces are far too inconsistent, and as something that's our only reliable way of scoring, it's not really reliable. I think one of the big problems we have is a lack of a left-footed player who can take set pieces. Basically, the entire team we have is righties, except for Robinson and Luca de la Torre. So, or Jedi Robinson, I should say. But yeah, it's a pretty big issue for this squad. So yeah, now going into the individual players, and almost every player had a couple of really bad moments this game. I'm going to be talking about the good moments as well. But keep in mind, we're going to be in a World Cup where if we go down against a team, we're going to be going up against world-class defenses almost every single game. So one mistake can cost us a ton of points. And not only world-class defenses, world-class strikers. So mistakes are going to matter. I want to be talking about the good things about players as well, but we have to start taking notice of these mistakes, bring them to players' attention, because they need to be corrected. I have a feeling that we're going to be celebrating after this game, which I understand, but we shouldn't really be doing that. We just lost. Zack Steffen in goal, at the moment, he's not good. Just straight up, he is not a good goalkeeper. He can be good. I think he can be great. But when he doesn't play, he becomes worse and worse. And honestly, this World Cup qualifying cycle, comparing him to the rest of the goalkeepers in CONCACAF, which is not exactly the highest standard, I think he's been below average. He's been giving up a lot of really bad mistakes, and he's been costing us points. That being said, I love his ceiling. He can make some great reaction saves. I love what he can do with playing the ball at the back. And while he's really rusty with coming out to claim balls, and he hasn't looked good in the air, I think as he plays more and more, those issues will go away, and he will be a very good keeper. But the thing is, he has to play. And at the moment at Man City, he's not playing. I'd honestly take a loan to the MLS for him at this point, because he doesn't look good. And at the moment, I think we should go with Matt Turner, because building out the back is not going to happen to begin with. Not being good with your feet isn't as big of an issue. And with that, Matt Turner has been so good for us in goal. It's the most confident I've been in a keeper since Tim Howard, and that includes Brad Guzan when he was starting in the Premier League. Matt Turner is a very good shot stopper, and I believe we should make the most of that talent. And until Zack Steffen starts to get some playing time, it's a real issue that has to be addressed. Next, going into our defense, we have a real problem with our center backs right now. Walker Zimmerman has big issues playing it out of the back. I have talked about this before, but when we're getting pressed by a really good team, that's going to be a big issue. And that's not the biggest thing, though. something that needs to be said about him is I don't think he's a reliable set-piece defender, which might sound weird to you because you're like, hey, he wins everything in the air. What do you mean he's not reliable? Well, if you've watched a lot of Nashville in the MLS, you know that they concede set-piece goals at a very high rate. They were talking about it during the Panama game because Zimmerman scored one off of his teammate. But I think the way he attacks balls, it's a very high-risk, high-reward technique. And while it's really flashy and it gets noticed, that's not necessarily a good thing. When you're noticing a center back a lot of times it's because they're doing something wrong. Think David Luiz. But, yeah, I don't think he's much better in the air than someone like a Chris Richards, who we saw him jumping with Mikel Antonio, or even John Brooks, because if you go back and watch him in the Nations League, he was doing the same exact thing as Walker Zimmerman. Now, Walker, he's got some great points to him. I think his defensive instincts are on point. He's a really talented defender. I think his athleticism is going to become an issue as we start playing world-class teams. But he definitely has some points. But I think in this team, he's nothing more than a stopgap until Chris Richards Chris Richards should be starting anyway, until someone like a Mark McKenzie, a Justin Shea, a Cameron Carter-Vickers, or an Eric Palmer-Brown really shows how good they can be. Next, we're going to Miles Robinson and DeAndre Yedlin. And I think at this point, at least on a world soccer stage, they are just athletes. The skill isn't there, and honestly, the defensive instincts, which I think Jedi and Walker have, I don't think they're really there. They both make mistakes at a pretty high rate, and they can make up for it with their athleticism. But when the athletes get better, say we go against a team like Wales, and they have a pace merchant like Daniel James up front, will Miles Robinson be able to cope? I really don't think so at this point, and I know for sure DeAndre Yedlin won't. We saw him in the Premier League. And it's disappointing, but I think at this point we have to recognize those two ceiling. And that ceiling isn't that low. Like, being a really good athlete definitely has its benefits. There are a couple players who can make a career out of being good athletes. And that's not necessarily a knock against them. But it has to be acknowledged that these guys have a lot of issues with them. Next, going to Jedi Robinson. I thought he looked really good today. His crosses are still a bit inconsistent. He had the one which was probably our best goal-scoring chance of the game, which we really butchered across. But I might have had one or two in those in my career, so I can appreciate a good butchered cross that turns into a chance. One issue that I saw with him this game is he still tries to beat players off the dribble in our defensive half, which it worked out today, but it might not work as the opposition gets better. And this isn't a type of thing where he's just, oh, I'm better than the Costa Rican players, I can do this. No, he was doing this in the Premier League last year. Like, it's something that he keeps trying to do, and Musah was doing it as well. And I think it's something we have to really break that habit because it could get punished at a high level. And if we give the ball away in the final third against a team with a world-class striker, that's 4 years of work down the drain. Next, going to Tyler Adams. He came out injured today, and his inability to stay on the field, honestly, a good portion of this team's inability to stay on the field is something that needs to be talked about. But that's a discussion for another day. I think at this point, he's a defensive specialist who is kind of limited going forward, which is weird to say because on this squad, I think he's one of our better technical players. But in terms of a world stage, he's a destroyer, which again, that isn't a bad thing, but especially with how limited our center backs are with building the ball at the back, it would have been nice to have a 6 who can drop deep, collect the ball, and build with that. But it doesn't look like that's going to be him. It doesn't look like that's going to be his game. And at this point, we should start looking at him as a rich man's Acosta, which isn't a bad thing, but it's a thing. Speaking of, we got Acosta, defensive specialist, very limited going forward. We need to take him off free kicks. It's not going to happen with him at this point. His delivery's fine on set pieces, but it isn't good enough to get him on the field because when he's on the field, our quality of play drops substantially, and we can't impose our will on opponents. It's been happening for too long. Though, it should be said that if we are going to keep this center back pairing and we do put Matt Turner in the goal, like, we're not going to be able to dominate teams anyway. So maybe there's an argument that we should keep Acosta on the field, because once we go up against a pretty good team, we're only going to be able to win by scraping by against opponents. At this point, that's what it looks like. Next, going into Yunus Musah, who, man, this guy is a very talented player. I honestly think he might have been the most talented player on the field today. However, he is pretty clearly inexperienced. He had this one really bad giveaway after making a good move, and like, I look at Musah, and I definitely see the talent. He's going to be a great player, but he's going to be a teenager in the World Cup. He's not somebody who I really think we can rely on as talented as he is. He's going to be going up against players just as talented as him with at least 5 more years of playing at a top level than him. Like, that's no fault of his own, and if we were a much better team, we'd be able to put him into a situation where he wouldn't have to have a baptism by fire in the World Cup. But with the squad how it is, with us basically missing a whole generation, like, our players are, 25 to 30, they just didn't pan out. Like, none of them, aside from goalkeepers, but goalkeepers develop later anyway. But, yeah, Musah, he's a really good player. Also, he's a much better athlete than I thought he was. I think that's because, I kind of made a judgment on him when he first made his debut, and he was obviously, way younger than everybody else, so I think I thought he was, a lot smaller, a lot weaker than a lot of the other guys. No, he's just younger, and he's going to keep becoming a better athlete, which is definitely a good thing. Next, Pulisic. I think he just needs to become more consistent, which we've been saying for a while, but he needs to be able to have those top performances week in, week out. This doesn't have to be goals every week, but he needs to make a substantial impact on the game, week in, week out. At the moment, he get taken out of the game by just being fouled a couple of times, which, yeah, it shows that they respect him as a player, but he needs to do something with that. If I were him, I'd be watching a lot of Wilfried Zaha footage, a lot of Jack Grealish while he was at Aston Villa, because he's talented enough to make an impact at a World Cup level. He's one of those players who I'm really confident in, but he needs to learn how to play as the best player on the field, because we've seen how good he can be at Chelsea when he's coming off the bench and running at tired teams or playing as a wing with a bunch of really good players around him. That's not the situation he has right here. He needs to learn how to play as that best player. Next, we got Tim Weah, and he's been very consistent for us. Not the best game today, but he was still making a couple of chances happen. He's been our best player throughout World Cup qualifying, in my opinion, and there's nothing I can really fault him at the international level. I do want him to get some better club form because he hasn't been playing too consistently there. He hasn't been looking like a top player in Lille, but the talent is definitely there. I'm curious how he will do once the level around him gets better. Like, once he's going up against, a top-level right back or a left back, every single game, how will he do? I'm not sure, but he's been very good, and that's all you can really ask of him. He's been the most consistent player in the field. I wonder if him being, the son of a really good player who's playing in Africa every World Cup qualifying cycle, maybe he has more respect for a World Cup qualifying than other players, because I feel like he's somebody who takes every one of these games seriously, and I'm not sure if that's something throughout the squad, and I really like that mentality out of Tim Weah. Next, Ricardo Pepe. He needs to find his goal-scoring form because he is so good as a 9. His movement, hold-up play, and first touch are something that no other striker on this team can bring. But at the moment, he isn't scoring. He isn't making himself as involved as he could be. Part of that, I feel like, is the system, but at the same time, he needs to find a way to impact the games. But similar to Musah, even though some issues are obviously there, he is going to be a great player. But he is clearly a young guy. For the subs, Gio Reyna, he's coming back from injury and sickness, so I don't really want to judge him too much on this game, but I feel like he does need more experience. He needs to keep playing week in, week out, which he should do at Dortmund, but he just needs to stay on the field. Luca De La Torre, I feel like he needs to find the final ball a bit more consistently. I really like him in build-up. He is so smooth on the ball, and I don't like saying this too much because it's so subjective, but he's a guy who passes the eye test. Like the first time we saw him play for the USA team against, Northern Ireland, everybody could just see, oh, this guy has it. The talent that this guy has is amazing, and I really want to see him clean up that final ball, add some goals to his game, add some more decisive final passes to his game, and if he can do that, he should be a starter for this team, but it is something he needs to work on. Jesus Ferreira, I really want him to find his finishing boots. He just needs to learn how to play as a 9, which I don't even know if he should do that because I don't think he's naturally a 9. But at the same time, if he wants to fit into our team, our system, he does need to find finishing. He does need to, I guess, learn how to win balls in the air a lot better, but I don't think that's his game. So as a player, I wouldn't even really want him to do that. I wouldn't want him to put time into that when he could be focusing on his creativity. But if he does want to succeed in this system, it's what he needs to do. He's a player that's very hard to talk about because you look at Jesus Ferreira, he's clearly talented. I love what he can do at a 10 position. Maybe I wouldn't prefer him to Giovanni Reyna or Brenden Aaronson, but he's clearly a good option. But I feel like he's played a lot more than maybe he should be, but he's still a good prospect, but he's being played out of position and maybe played over some players who deserve him more. Lastly, Shaq Moore and Jordan Morris, they just aren't at this level. It's almost like DeAndre Yedlin. It's kind of pointless talking about them. They just aren't that good. They shouldn't be in the squad. Next, for Gregg Berhalter himself, I look at his system and I still think it's far too rigid. It's not adaptable enough to the different players that we have. We kept attacking through our fullbacks like DeAndre Yedlin, like he was Serginho Dest, and he just wasn't making things happen. And we didn't change how he played. We just put in Shaq Moore, which didn't do anything to change things. You'd have to think, he should understand we don't have a dangerous attacking player on this side, so we should change how we play, but he doesn't do it. He just puts a square peg into a round hole, and it definitely cost us today. We still had Acosta dropping back to pick up the ball like he's Weston McKennie. Why? He's not good on the ball. Him in possession is a big weakness of his game. If you want to have him in the field, try to get him on the ball somewhere where he can have time to ping a pass in, because he can hit a dead ball pretty well, but first touch, I think his isn't that good. He's, I think, slower tactically than a lot of our other players. I look at someone like Gianluca Busio. If you go back to our goal against Jamaica, he made this one really nice one-touch pass that I don't think Kellyn Acosta could ever do in his life. So I think he's kind of slower in the head than, which that sounds really mean, but just his soccer brain isn't as good as someone like a Gianluca Busio. And we're treating him like it isn't that. And also our pressing, we still just press at completely random times. From what I see, it's not we're against a lower level opposition. This is a heavily rotated Costa Rica team. No, pressing is still just kind of random. And then the lack of creativity in this team, at some point it's on the manager. I'm not under an illusion that our players are infallible, and just because we got a guy playing in Europe, that means he's some type of soccer god or something. No, we still have players who can make mistakes and can have off games. But the consistency of how uncreative we are has to be addressed at some point. And I look at this squad, Musah can create things at Valencia. Giovanni Reyna has some great moments at Dortmund. Pulisic at Chelsea. At some point, it has to be talked about that these players play worse in the national team than they do at their club. And at some point, that's on the manager. And that's just something I want to say. And also, this isn't something I want to dwell on too much because I feel like it deserves a deeper look. But I feel like the culture in the squad has gotten worse. I'm obviously not in the locker room. I don't have proof of this or anything. But I wonder if people know how I'm feeling because it's something that I've been feeling, I guess. Overall, I feel like we're kind of in the same place that we were a few years ago. We have 5 years ago. I mean, sure, we have a bit more quality than we did before. I feel like our players are getting better. But if we're looking at the World Cup and we're looking at this squad, we're not going to be able to outplay teams. if we want to win, we're going to have to be that scrappy old USA team that'll defend, hit teams on the counter, and just hope we can get a result. Hope that the other team screws up enough. And if we're going to be playing top teams for 120 minutes in the knockout round, mistakes can only happen so much. Eventually their quality is going to shine through, like it did against Belgium in 2014. And when I'm looking at this team with how little creativity we have, how little we're going to score, how our defense is very fragile, I don't think we can win in any way but being a scrappy team right now. And if that's the case, that's the same thing that we were 5 years ago, same thing we were 8 years ago, back to the last World Cup, and same thing USA always been. And in other words, we won't have changed the way the world views American soccer. So, yeah, that's my opinion on this team heading into the World Cup. It's amazing that we did get there, but keep in mind, that's the barest of bare minimums. This was the expectation for the squad, and we only managed to get there on goal difference. So, yeah, going into the World Cup, unless something changes, which it very well could, we could change our way we play. If we get a couple of good friendlies against some high-quality opponents, I'd really like that, and I think that could really help us. And maybe someone like Zack Steffen will find a loan. Serginho Dest can keep developing defensively. Maybe we get John Brooks, Chris Richards back in the squad. Tyler Adams gets some more playing time. Weston McKennie will come back. Gio and Musah will only get better. Maybe Christian Pulisic will come in on great form. We could have a striker who really finds form. Maybe Ricardo Pepe gets a really good run out to start next year. It could get better. It could easily get better. But at the moment, I have to call it like I see it. And this team doesn't have the quality to outplay teams in the World Cup. And the only way we can get by is by doing the same thing that we've always done. So yeah, that's all I've talked about. Pretty disappointing game. And yeah, that's all I've talked about. See ya.